One in five suffer.
Erase the stigma.
Brain difference is not a crime.
Mental health isn't just your problem.
It's our problem.
And now, Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
Welcome to Mental Health Mondays. We are. Go ahead, Dave. You go first this
Well,
time.
we're Marla and Dave. Well, that's Marla. I'll be the one to go first. And I'm Dave.
Yeah, when I say we're
Here every week, every Monday.
we are.
Hence the name Mental Health Mondays.
Marla and Dave.
Yes. Again, we welcome you to the show. We want to remind you to text the word GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 818-698-1021 and support our A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign. Man, we weren't here last week because of the holiday, but we're picking it up with a bang right here for you today. And we want to remind you again that our Mental Health Mondays is brought to you by NAMI San Fernando Valley and Loving Beyond Reason. In most situations, we all know the benefit of keeping everything in balance. But like most things in life, it's easier said than done. Our guest today is Ariel Cohen. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he's had a lifetime of learning to understand the concept of balance from the inside out. He's going to share his story in the hope that we learn something from his experience that will help us not only stay mindful of the concept of balance, but also to erase the stigma surrounding mental health and much more. When we come back, our guest is Ariel Cohen.
And don't move because you won't want to miss one word. We'll be right back.
Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley believe it doesn't take much to make life a little better for our neighbors, coworkers, friends, our family members, even our children who suffer with mental illness. When you support our A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign, you are doing your part to erase the stigma surrounding mental illness. For just $1 today, or $1 a day for 1 week, just $7, we can look forward to a future that does not include the unfortunate and uncomfortable stares, bullying, and the subsequent isolation that our loved ones who suffer with brain differences deal with. Text the word GIVE, that's G-I-V-E, to 818-698-1021 to donate. A dollar today keeps the stigma away. Brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley. Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI.
As we promised, we're welcoming our guest, Ariel Cohen, to the show. Welcome to Mental Health Mondays.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What a welcome.
I'm gonna pause here for just 1 second. This is not normally the thing, but I want us to all. It never needs to be lost on anyone here as to what we're going through right now as a nation with the loss, with the mass shootings. And so I just want to just give just a moment to just acknowledge the families and those who have lost and lost in love and their children, and same with Buffalo. So let's, mental health is super important for all of us. And I just wanted to say that here at Mental Health Mondays, our prayers and our thoughts are definitely with you. So, Ariel, welcome.
Hi, Marla. Thank you.
Well, Ariel, one of the things that you mentioned to Hannah, who books our guest, is the concept of the Jewish family being focused on family and community versus the individual. So give us an insight into what it was like growing up in that environment and how that served you on one hand, but maybe left out some of the things that could have been, that were overlooked, that could be focused on a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Dave. I'm glad you asked. So, I was thinking about this ahead of coming on your show and thinking about how I wanted to conceptualize the value of family in the Jewish community. And there's a term in Hebrew, it's ledor vador, which means from generation to generation. And when we in the Jewish community say that, what we're essentially saying is, from one generation to the next, we pass on our values and we pass on our traditions. And that is really, to me, all about the glue that holds together the Jewish family, right? Is the passing on of our stories and our and what's important to us. And I think what can sometimes happen, which I think is just very natural, is that collectivistic mentality can sometimes become problematic for the individuals in the family, because, it's about honoring and balancing the needs of the individuals as well as the family, because we're stronger together, but we also have to acknowledge that each one of us is a unique person. And if it's okay with you two, I think this is a great time to talk a little bit about my story. Is that
yes,
please do.
by all means, definitely.
So I'm the oldest of 4 brothers in a 5-year period. My parents were very busy.
Obviously.
And they were trying for a daughter, and they kept getting boys. And when they got to the 4th boy, they said, "Okay, I think the house is a little full." I was born the oldest, and when I was 7 years old, my parents decided to move to the country that my father was originally from, Israel.
Oh wow!
And it was in order to be closer to the other half of the family and really enrich the connection that we had with that side of my family. Cousins, aunts and uncles, and it was wonderful in a lot of ways. However, there were unexpected unintended consequences to that. My mother was living in a foreign country. It was very hard on her, and it created a lot of stress. That led to marital strain between my parents at the time. And
so your mother, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your mother she wasn't Jewish. Yes, no?
She knew a little bit of Hebrew. She is Jewish, but she had never lived in Israel. She had only visited there once before. And or maybe more than once, but only visiting, and she barely spoke the language. And to boot, my mother is also a speech therapist, so
wow.
communicating is her whole life.
Wow.
The really part that I think really made it more difficult for my parents was my mother's parents didn't want us to leave the country, and about 2 weeks after we moved, my mother's father, my grandfather, passed away unexpectedly, which was really hard on the whole family. And my parents had to fly back to the United States to attend to his funeral and be here for my grandmother. And I think that really set off a lot of different things in motion. But basically, fast forward 3 years later, I'm 10 years old, and my parents decide that what's best for the family is to come back to the United States. And at that point in time, I think the stressors of moving and being uprooted twice, and the needs of the family and the needs of my parents to attend to their relationship really kind of led to me slipping through the cracks. And I think that Dave and I were talking before the show started about how how people will acknowledge that they have a history of anxiety. And I'm one of those people. It's one of the things that I think makes me really relatable as a therapist, is that I know what those experiences are like. I think that predisposition to anxiety also led to some childhood depression, because I was under a lot of stress and I didn't know how to cope with it. So I started failing classes in middle school, and I was withdrawn socially. And that made it really difficult, because my parents were able to help get me back on track with school and with making some friends, but I really wasn't able to attend to the real mental health challenges that I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And so when I became a young adult at 19, I went through a really difficult breakup with the first woman that I fell in love with and dated for several months. And it was a very difficult thing to go through, because we really cared about each other, but we just weren't right for each other. And I fell into a very deep depression. And what came of that was actually my parents were in a much different place in their life, where they were able to see, oh, there's something deeper going on here. Ariel, would you like to go to therapy? And they offered it, and they really said they thought it would be a good thing. And so I went, and I was able to uncover a lot of things that I didn't even realize from my childhood leading all the way up to that point. And I'm forever grateful for that opportunity, because of the honoring of my needs as an individual, as well as acknowledging that we're a family. And so I like sharing that story, because I think it's really important to look at that fine balance of like, how do you attend to your family, but also how do you look at each unique individual as having needs that have to be met as well.
I think what jumps out at me right quick, though, is that obviously that your parents were able to work on their scenario. So even though you went to Israel and then you came back, and you were saying that they were in struggle. So I think that I want to point that out specifically, because I think that it's like the oxygen mask for yourself, and then you can give to your children. So the mere fact that they came up with that as an option for you at some point, it's, to me, that speaks volumes, which I think is awesome for an example.
I'm so glad that you pointed that out, Marla. I completely agree. the oxygen mask analogy, my clients are sick of hearing it because I say it all the time too. And I'm joking partially because the truth is it's so true and so relevant. And I think there's a thread, there's a connection there to what you said, which is them modeling, which one of the things I wanted to say as a takeaway today was modeling. You know, my son is 1.5, so I'm learning that more than ever now. You know, he's a toddler and he's already watching and learning so much.
So much more about what you do versus what you say and what you teach. Yeah, we parents of 3 and grandparents to 1. We understand that fully.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think it really came full circle with my parents being able to be there for me later, as you said.
Right.
Well, one of the things that I'm glad that jumps out to me in the way that you framed the issues that you were dealing with growing up is that a lot of times I can't speak to other people's culture, but I can speak to the African American culture. And there are times in our history when racism and the mistreatment of African Americans as a whole almost seems a little bit more important to deal with than sometimes the individual's problem. That finding that balance sometimes becomes hard versus, especially when you're dealing with a situation where problems that face the entire community can be so dire that they take priority over sometimes what's happening with the individual. And sometimes that seems to be kind of how you were describing it in the family. And when you have to move from one country to the other and then have some issues there and some unfortunate events as the death of a loved one, and you have to move back, sometimes you can't avoid those issues, so they have to take priority. Depending on how you might feel about that, you still have to move, if that makes any sense. And so some of the problems that can bring up could still be an issue. So the balance then becomes the key factor.
I think, Dave, you could have just interviewed yourself. I completely agree. I mean,
he does often, as a matter of fact, Ariel. Thanks for paying attention to that. Dave often interviews himself. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is I was thinking of the word balance as you were talking, and then you said it, and it just solidified for me that, you know, we talk a lot about balance when it comes to mental health because it's not really something that somebody achieves and then it's over. It's something we're constantly striving for. Mm-hmm. So like in the African American community, the balance there. Yeah.
Well, and so what we find is that balance becomes an issue, and that doesn't diminish one problem over the other. It doesn't prioritize. It just means that it's just like learning how to walk. We've seen you have a 1.5-year-old, you said, when they first try to get that balance, it's kind of wobbly at first, but then they come around to it eventually. So
Dave, hold that thought.
Thank you, Marla. It's actually interrupting
me. We'll
me.
be right back after this break.
It's time for the Mental Health Minute with Marla and Dave.
Bipolar disorder affects about 45 million people. The World Health Organization says it typically consists of both manic and depressive episodes separated by periods of normal mood.
Manic episodes involve elevated or irritable mood, overactivity, rapid speech, inflated self-esteem, and decreased need for sleep. People who have manic attacks do not experience depressive episodes. Episodes are also classified as having bipolar disorder.
Effective treatments are available for the treatment of the acute phase of bipolar disorder and the prevention of relapse. These are medicines that stabilize the mood. Psychosocial support is an important component of treatment as well.
And as usual here on Mental Health Mondays, if you or someone you know is suffering with bipolar disorder, hopefully you and or they are in treatment. And if not, please seek professional help immediately. Remember, you are not alone.
This message is brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
I never do anything without thinking about it first.
Marla is a feeler.
I basically live my personality on my scene.
But when Marla and Dave get together, it's like a match dancing with a firecracker.
Okay, Dave, continue your thought. You brought up balance, and we were talking about the similarities.
Well, I was going to ask Ariel, how easy, I mean, it's easy to throw terms around like balance. And then especially when we bring up the fact that sometimes issues come up and issues have to be dealt with, and some issues have to take priority over other issues. And so how do you find that balance? Where is a lot of times I tell Marla all the time, if you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, you need to plan regular vacations, even if it's just 2 or 3 days, bounce out to Vegas or something by yourself, just so that you can have enough free mental space and capacity to deal with the issues that happen from day to day.
To come home and deal with him.
Yes. I happen to be a 4-day vacation problem, Ariel.
So she needs 4 days.
Yes, she needs a 4-day vacation to deal with
Our
me.
marriage was actually set up with vacation spots already put in it, seeing as though Dave sings and takes 6 and he's in and out of town often. So we do have that. That's our saving grace. But yes, I agree with that. So
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that when it comes to that balance, I was thinking about the obvious one when it comes to families. If we're attending to the needs of the family, is a simple thing that I like to say about how children tend to cooperate when they know that they feel connected, right? And not that cooperation is what we're solely seeking, but I want to focus more on the connection side of things, which is having meaningful family experiences, right? Going out to the movies together when it's safe, obviously, or having dinner together at the table and talking about an interesting topic, or whatever, a board game or a puzzle, whatever is meaningful for a family. I think that's a great way to attend to the connection and the strength of the bonds there. When it comes to the individuals, I think that's where it gets a little bit more tricky, because each person is unique. I mean, you said you two have 3 kids and you have grandkids too, and you probably know that each one of them is a completely unique individual. With
we know for sure.
And personality and temperament. I mean, it's amazing how in one family, and that's some of my favorite, is when I work with a family where the personalities are really diverse and you have to sort of like help people understand each other better. I think that understanding, that mutual understanding, and then honoring Marla's need for a 4-day vacation, for example, Dave, I think you modeled that beautifully, saying, Marla, if you've got to go to Vegas for 4 days, go and take care of yourself.
What he's not telling you, Ariel, is my mother lives there. He's not sending me on any vacation. Dave, shame on you. Smack to the hand.
Not quite a vacation. Okay.
Busted.
You did get busted, Dave. But with kids, I think there is this element of parents sometimes understand aspects of their children that their children are still figuring out for themselves. So sometimes it's saying to them, maybe today you just need to have a quiet day, or would you like to go to the aquarium, because I know you love looking at fish and talking about the science of it all, or whatever it is, but really kind of helping at an early and age appropriate level instill in them the understanding that their needs are also important through the actions that Marla was talking about earlier, the way that actions speak louder than words.
I have a question, Ariel, that's interesting for me. We talked about the cultural imprint, I'll call it that, just with people in general. And so you being raised and connected with the Jewish community, how has that imprinted you as to what your approach is on when it comes to family and dealing with your children? Because essentially, to be honest, I know that it's huge in the Black community and the African American community as to how we relate or don't relate, or what we relate to or what we don't relate to. So that's interesting. My personal query, kind of just wanted to know that. How does that come into what you do?
I think you describing it as a cultural imprint is as perfectly described, Marla, because it is an imprint, right? It's something that happens before we can even speak. And we feel it and we know it on a very visceral, physical level. And I think that's sometimes we take for granted how much of a role culture plays in our identity. And I think that's why I was so glad when I spoke with Hannah and you two were interested in having me join here, because I think it is really interesting to understand that we all come from some culture. And I think that the best way that I would describe it is there are going to be things about that culture that we are going to take to very easily, and other things that we might wrestle with. And I would say to anybody listening, that's very natural. I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, being part of a culture is a wonderful thing, and it needs to be embraced in many ways. And also there are some things that, I've seen when I was saying earlier about the Jewish community, 𝘬𝘸𝘦𝘦𝘱𝘴, from generation to generation. Sometimes the next generation, even in an individual family, chooses to do things a little bit differently. And they adopt different aspects of the culture that may have not been in the home they were raised in, or they might choose not to adopt certain aspects of that. And I think that can create some family strain, but I think that is very natural, that variation from generation to generation.
And that's interesting because, to be honest, what I really thought about was Meet the Parents too, because Fokker in other words, his parents were so Jewish that coming up against De Niro and his completely Anglo-Saxon approach to that in itself created a very interesting stress that they had to find a balance. And I'm like, that's cultural for you right there in a nutshell. So
yeah, totally.
And while we all love the light and humorous approach that Meet the Parents series really took on that particular aspect of finding balance, especially within families, and then merging families, which requires another whole level of focus. What I'm a little bit more interested in is something that, in my mind, feels a little bit more dire, and that is, Marla mentioned remembering the victims in Uvalde, remembering the victims in Buffalo, remembering the victims in Philadelphia, and we can go on with just quoting the names of places that unfortunately had been victimized. We seem to be in a situation, an era, so to speak, where sides are no longer trying to work to come together and understand each other, but more and more we see that they're retreating to their individual corners and barricading themselves in and say, if you don't agree with me, to the extent of even in our political advertisements, we now see, when we don't like something or it's a problem that we face, even politically or socially, what comes out is a gun and just blow it away. I'm trying to figure out, how much more difficult is it to maintain that balance and maintain the focus on values that, seemed important in our past in today's social political environment?
It's a good question.
I mean, Dave, you're getting me thinking about so many different things related to that. And you're right, it is a really heavy topic to discuss. And I was thinking a lot about how what you just described is sort of like considering the idea of an individual within a larger family.
Yeah.
And then thinking about a society, a country like the United States, and then the various cultures within it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like, it's almost like those are the individuals.
Yes,
the various
yes.
cultures. And recognizing that, coexisting and respecting each other and understanding each other, understanding the common things that we have in common, which I think really, you're right, it does get lost. We get into these pockets and we don't see the humanity in other people. And I've worked with families for 10 years now. I hope to work with them for many more decades. And in that time, I've worked with families from different cultures. I'm very grateful to work with the Jewish community, but I've been fortunate to work with African-American families and Armenian families and white Anglo-Saxon families. And what I've seen is there are these things that we have in common that if we talked about them, we would see each other's humanity and we would understand each other and we would value each other's life in a way that I think is so important. So that it isn't, to what you said, Dave, we're going to blow this person away because I don't see them for being another human anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's heavy and it's hard to discuss, but it's important.
The essential package that we all have, just being human.
Yeah.
Good.
So
you
again,
keep
this is an amazing conversation, Ariel. We're glad to have you we're honored to have you as a guest, and you guys don't move because we have more stimulating conversation when we come back. Okay.
Oh no.
Marla, you know what that music means. I'll actually start it off today. The roll starts with this hand.
Oh, so
Pow.
now you're going to be part
Boom.
of when you've been asking me to pole dance?
Boom. Oh. Okay, see, yes, you're mixing a few genres, but hey, I like it. It's active. That music lets us know it's
One day,
time.
Ariel, they're going to get me a poll up in this mug, and it's going to be real.
It's time for our poll question break. Ariel, last week we asked what percentage of Americans report that worry and stress related to the COVID-19 pandemic are hurting their mental health. So our guest each week has an opportunity to guess the answer. The options were 27%, 38%, or 45%. To what percentage of Americans report that worry and stress related to the COVID-19 pandemic are hurting their mental health? We will give you...
Here's your chance.
I'm not even sure I remember because it was 2 weeks ago. What our
remember.
Do you remember? Okay, so your options are 27%, 38%, and 45%. Ariel, go.
I'm not proud that this is my best guess, but my best guess is 45%.
Your best guess is the best and the right answer.
It is, unfortunately, like you mentioned, the correct answer. And that's where we are these days. Marla, what's the new poll question for next week?
The new poll question next week, and we remind everybody to go to our social site so you can your voice can be heard. What is the most difficult mental illness to treat? Depression, ADHD, or BPD?
Now, we don't want you have a chance to answer it, Ariel, but we can't give the official answer
have to show back
until
up
next
here
week. So you got to
next
check
week
out next week's show. What
and
do you
see
think
if
it
you're
is?
right.
Is the most difficult mental illness to treat depression, ADHD, or BPD?
It's not going to be a popular comment, but I'm going to say I'm going to choose none of the above because I don't think I can choose one. So I'm going to leave it.
Ariel, you don't get a chance to make your own answers on our show. Okay, what you just did right there is called a party foul. All right, so we're going to have to mute your mic for the rest of the time, and you need to face the corner because that wasn't an option. How you going to just take over and just come on, Ariel?
He created a new category, D, none of the above.
No D.
Or all of the above, I should say. I want to thank you, Ariel, for playing along, being such a good sport. We want to remind you, text the word GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 818-698-1021. $1 a day keeps the stigma away. Back to the show.
See what he just did? He came up in here and made his own rules. All right. Oh, I'm gonna find you. I know people. I got people. I'm on you, sir. Anyway, so that's awesome. So yes, but I want to go ahead and finish up. It goes by so fast. We're back at the end.
Time moves quickly when we're having fun, and you've shared such good nuggets of wisdom in this short amount of time, Ariel. So we thank you for that again. So. I think you were wrapping up pretty much, and you had a good point, pretty much of when you're dealing with such issues, instead of retreating to our various corners, so to speak, or making sure that we're only preaching to the choir, as I like to say, talking to people who think like us. It seems like that old adage of it's impolite to talk about politics in public amongst your friends or at the dinner table. It seems like that's the exact opposite of what we need to be doing, according to how you answered that question.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I think that, this is a topic for another time, but modern technology is fascinating, and what it's doing to people is fascinating. And it's really easy to tear somebody a new one, so to speak, online behind a screen.
I call them keyboard cowards.
Yeah.
I love it.
Because you don't have to.
I'm taking that.
You don't even. You know what? First of all, sir, let me tell you what you can't do. You just made up your own category. You added a D to our questions, and now you're gonna steal what I'm gonna say and my face.
I'm gonna give you credit. I'm sorry.
There you go.
Okay.
He's gonna quote you, is what he's saying.
I'm gonna quote you every time.
Like, this is the boldest dude I've ever met in my entire life.
I should have started with the fact that I'm gonna quote you.
Just pay me. That's all.
What I will say is, as opposed to these keyboard cowards, thank you, Marla, is that the old adage of it's impolite to talk about politics at the table is actually exactly what we need. And obviously it needs to happen with a certain degree of respect and the desire to understand each other and appreciate each other. But I think that's really the key. The key is to be able to have conversations, meaningful dialogue, and to be able to connect more, not separate more.
Well, I will say this. I totally agree. I live by that creed. And on a serious note, I wouldn't be the person that I am if I were not. I say all the time, if I had to give my own self a tagline, it would be see me, hear me, and grow with me, because I believe that I'm going to be growing until the day that I'm no more if I stay open to take things in, because all the answers can't be in me. In other words, I'm put in a world with other people for a reason, and so I'm touched, and I take pieces that really all experiences now, to me, even the ones that may be negative, are experiences that I look at differently, and those are the things that teach me the most about myself. And so I think that that's super important for us to get back to that and really just tap into our human essentials that we all have. We've lost compassion, respect, connection. That's not black and white. That's not, Jewish or Christian. That doesn't have any of that with it. And so I just am so glad that you're bringing focus to this, because that is the big thing. If we really just strip all the BS away, what we find is that we have these core things that make us human that we're now ignoring.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Marla. Thank you for saying that. And thank you two for having me here and allowing me to talk about this. I think we went some places I didn't even expect to go, but I'm growing with you, Marla and Dave. And
Well, he didn't say he was growing. It was just me.
Oh, Marla, I'm growing.
Yeah, Dave's probably going to be the
watching
same.
us grow.
Yeah, you and I will grow, and Dave can be in the stands.
But I love what you said, which is I completely agree. And I also believe that we all have the opportunity to grow throughout life. I work with children, and it's so rich and interesting to work with them and their families. But I also have friends and colleagues that work with the elderly, and I see how people are committed to their growth and their learning, and how, I look at that and I go, gosh, I hope that's where I am at that age. And the reason why I feel that way is because I get so much out of it now, and I want to continue to learn and grow as a person.
Ariel, again, thank you for agreeing to be a guest on Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave. One of the summarizing points that you brought up to Hannah, again, our booker for a guest on our show, was that balance when it comes to a family or even a greater social network. It's not about neglecting the needs of either the individual or the group, but honoring both. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, I think that when we achieve a degree of balance, or a modicum of balance between the needs of the individual and the group, or society at large and a group within society, I think that's when we really see that true healing and growth can happen. Because without honoring both, each side suffers a little bit more.
Well, thank you so much for that. And the next time we speak, because I'm sure this won't be the last, you can tell me which one of your brothers was subject to the pink diaper. Someone more one. Okay, so we'll deal with that. Yeah, for sure. And accompany that with photos. Thanks, would appreciate that.
Our guest has been Ariel Cohen, licensed marriage and family therapist. Ariel, thank you so much. We appreciate you for honoring us with your presence.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you too.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.